Hi, everyone. Welcome to the penultimate, second to last office hour. There will be one more office hour tomorrow, and then that's the last of them. I will be making an announcement in an email coming up. I haven't sent an email yet addressing kind of like the downtime or the course conclusion email because I've been working out some details with my team. But there is going to be a pretty substantial extension to the course. So that news will be coming out soon. I'll be sending an email to you all about that. That said, let's launch into the office hour. So I'm going to open up these questions on the message board. If you're watching along and you have any questions for me, please share those in the live chat. There was a comment on a video that I had uploaded saying the download link is not available in the hub for this video. Oh, and that appears to be true. I thought I uploaded all the this week's videos, but I suppose I didn't. So let me go do that now. Download them from YouTube. I may have already deleted them off my computer. Yep. So I'll have to download those from YouTube and then upload them. So I'll just get that going real quick. Okay, so those videos are downloading. Once they're done downloading, I will upload those to the video downloads or drive. And then once it's done, I'll person know they're available for download. So the question here about DW3, how to group up code and get the max payment percent total. They had a few different questions about some computations related to the third question in DF or DW3. Someone had shared a post here about how to get a max when we have a data frame like this. So this is very useful. So they want something like the max for each user ID, but they have different tags associated with each one. So we can imagine this being something like postal code, this being BNF name, and we want the row with the max. And this solution here shows how to do that. If we start with something like this, so Very useful suggestion. So I'm going to expand on that answer. Um, so we should remember that computations between pandas objects are controlled by their indices. For example, if I have a data frame like this one, and I divide by a series, like here we'll just have user ID as a index. And the result will be like what we would hope for, which is they're matched up by user ID. So this 1 becomes 1/3. This 2 becomes 2/3. Likewise here. This becomes a 1. This becomes 1/5, and this becomes 2/5. In other words, pandas matches the index levels by name and aligns the values for the division using the values in the appropriate level of the two indices. Of course, you could also reset the index so that only user ID, or in our case, postcode, was a member of the index, and then you wouldn't have to worry about this at all. In either case, pandas will generally do the correct thing when we're performing arithmetic operations between different pandas objects, as long as they have meaningful indices. I'm not yet very comfortable with pandas and the syntax and various ways in which we can use it, which is why I probably don't use it quite efficiently. Can you guide how to get used to reading the documentation? I'm not sure, but I can try. Let me quickly upload these videos since they are done downloading. So if I go to the pandas documentation, there's a number of different places we could go. There's some links under getting started, 10 minutes to pandas, essential basic functionality, introduction to data structures, tutorials. So let's have a look through these rather quickly. So this covers sort of the basic stuff that we covered in probably the basic DS modules notebook, where we talk about like creating some simple data structures, introspecting like data types of the columns, viewing data, etc. So this covers like some basic stuff, selection. This seems to be probably pretty similar. And I imagine that, like, given the length of these documents, they probably have a lot of overlap because these appear to be pretty long pages. And I therefore don't really recommend, like, the way that I use documentation, even with something that I'm like totally new to, is that I usually don't just read it. Usually I use it as a reference. So these like tutorials might be useful if you really want to like spend a lot of time like sitting down and practicing, like writing the code that appears in this and thinking through what it does. I'm sure would be a useful exercise in terms of getting you comfortable with pandas and introducing you to the different things that are available. The way that I tend to read documentation or use documentation is I will think to myself something like, I wish I knew how to select a row out of a data frame, an entire row, based on if a particular column has the maximal value in that column. And I might approach this two different ways. I might think, well, I know if I want to select a row, I can do that using .lock. That's something I know. But what I don't know how to do is get the index of the row with the maximal value in a particular column. And then I might do a search like index of max pandas, or like index of max row pandas. And what would happen is when I search for that, the first thing that pops up is this data frame index max function. And I would say, oh, that sounds like it's probably helpful. And I click on it, and it takes me to the documentation. It says returns the index of the first occurrence of the maximum over the requested axis. Well, this sounds exactly like what I want. And so I'll try it, and I'll go to a notebook, and I'll just like make a simple example for myself. I'll make a data frame. Here's the data frame. And then I'll say I want the index of the row with the maximal value in column B. So I'll select out column B, and then I'll use this index max method. And there, it turns out to be row A. So now, if I call this like my data frame, I can do df b index max. That gets me the index of the row. And then I could say, okay, I want to select that row out of the original data frame. So I just do lock around that index, and I get that whole row. So this is the way that I kind of use documentation to solve problems, is I think to myself, like, what do I want to accomplish? What is it that I'm trying to do? And then I think, how would I maybe do that? And I identify the parts of my solution that I know how to do and the parts that I don't know how to do. And I start searching for the parts that I don't know how to do. Now, if I have no idea how I might even accomplish the thing I'm trying to do, say I didn't think like, oh, well, I know how to select rows. So if I could get the index of the row I need, then I could do this. And I just need to look up how to get the index of the row. Then the way that I would, then I would just try Googling like get row of data frame with max in column. Something like that. And unsurprisingly, the first thing that pops up is a Stack Overflow post. I don't know if this is going to be what I need. So I'll just like open it in a new tab. And I can now see the full title, and it says find row where values for column is maximal. And they describe it kind of exactly what I'm thinking about. How can I find the row for which the value of a specific column is maximal? df max will give me the maximal value, but I don't know how to get the corresponding row. So this is like exactly describing my hypothetical problem. And the first answer says you need to use argmax, which is now called index max. And it actually links to that part of documentation we were just looking at. And then it shows pretty much exactly what I did. They make a data frame. The index of the maximal value for column A is 3 with a value of 2.1. We can see that's the max. And they do that for like B and C. And then they show later on, so here they use IX instead of .lock. It does the same thing essentially, but this is pretty much what we had just done. They get the index of the maximal value for A, which is here. That index is I, and then they select out that row. Now here they're pointing out that like this is a little naive because we could have repeated indices, blah, blah, blah. But for our example, we don't care about those nuances. But that's more or less like an overview of how I use documentation and start like looking around for solutions to problems I have. I just like try and sort of write good search queries on Google, more or less. And that's how I learn a lot of things is I think through what it is I want to do. I think through that part carefully. And then I try and write a short, meaningful search query And then I start looking through results from my search, and it's really truly just using Google more or less. Many of my colleagues and peers have remarked that a lot of what they know about programming is just from making good use of internet search, because there's so many software packages and there are so many syntax elements of those software packages that you can't possibly memorize them all. You can't even memorize everything about the tools you use frequently. You'll only memorize like a small subset of things that you use like almost every day, or like every week or something. And then everything else you're probably going to have to look up pretty frequently. And I mean, to some degree, that just takes practice. Like, this is something that, you find like if it takes practice, but it takes, whenever I say something takes practice, I don't just mean like just do it over and over again. Do it mindfully. Think about what you're doing. So like even when you're writing a search query, if I had said something like get max of data frame, or just like max of data frame, then the first result would be pandas data frame max, right? And this is not what I want. And I should think about, why didn't I get the thing I wanted? Why is this not giving me something useful? And then I would think, oh, well, I didn't really say what I wanted in the search query. I should really say, like, I want to get a row of the data frame. And if I search that, like, well, now I'm getting stuff that doesn't all relate to pandas. So I'll include pandas in the search term, and then I'll get things that only relate to pandas. And here it's telling me to use iloc, loc, ix. Okay, I already know about that stuff. That's not what I'm trying to do either. So that's when I say like with max value of column or something. Or maybe just like with max value. And then I start getting kind of useful results. So whenever you're doing kind of like solving any problem, just be mindful of what you're doing, and think about as you developed your solution, what were you doing to improve your first attempts? So for instance, when I started out with max of data frame, I was only getting results that would return the actual maximum value, which is not really what I want. And so I did better by refining the language and being more specific about what I wanted out of the data frame. I didn't really want the max value. I wanted a row. And then I found I was getting results that didn't have to do with pandas, because data frames refer to things in other languages as well. So I included pandas to give me more specificity. And so it was more or less by refining the specificity of my search query that I was able to get to good results. So always be thinking critically about kind of like what you're doing to solve the problem, even if it's something that seemingly is unrelated, by like just making searches on the internet. So someone's struggling to get the correct answer for DW4. That's the script anomalies question. Their problem is most likely something I've pointed out to many in response to many questions. We will, if you use a merge with the chem table, we will perform an inner join, meaning any prescription with a BNF code that doesn't exist in the chem table will be dropped from the output merged DF. Just because we don't know what that BNF code corresponds to does not mean we want to eliminate it from our data. We will simply assume that those prescriptions are not opioids. This is advice I've given in other questions. Merge opioids. So that's most likely what's causing this person problems, is that they're doing a merge, which is going to possibly drop data. In general, we should be careful whenever we perform joins, because there is always a possibility that we will either drop or duplicate data from source to result. When performing joins, we should be careful to think about what kind of join we want to perform. That is left, right, inner, or outer. An index is not a column of the data frame. Therefore, if your index is what used to be the code column, For example, practice code will also give a key error. There are two solutions you could use here. One, the merge method also has a right index and left index keyword argument. So we could do, for instance, script.merge practice left on practice right index equals true. Or we could do something similar to what this student suggests. Before merging, rather than doing this, we could instead just do df.resetIndex. So I've got a data frame consisting of code and post code that I got from eliminating duplicate codes and practices. It has a code column as index. Oh, it's like exactly this question that I'm answering. For a person who doesn't know how to find a solution, what would you search? So my first kind of, so first of all, where I would begin is with the error message. It's difficult to get anywhere with debugging code if you're not thinking critically about what error messages mean. And this is why I emphasized in my discussion of data frames that data frames are essentially dictionaries of pandas series. The reason I emphasize this is because it influences how we interpret this key error. And if you go back and watch the pandas lectures, you'll actually hear me say, I guarantee you will encounter key errors when working with pandas. And the way to interpret them is that there is no column in your data frame with that name that you're trying to use as a reference. And I also at one point highlighted that an index is not strictly speaking a column in the data frame, and that if we try and access the index by saying like df and then the name of the index, that we will get a key error. So if I didn't know any of that, I could probably more or less suss out by just doing some experiments that the problem is that there is no column in my data frame with that name. That's what like that key error means. And then once I kind of like realized that the problem is that there's no column named code, I would think, okay, well, I understand now that the thing I'm thinking of as a column is actually an index. So now I need a solution for performing a join in pandas that is capable of using an index. And then I would just search pandas join based on column and index. And I get some results for the documentation. There's a user guide one here for merge, join, and concatenate. I would maybe do a control F and search for index. And just kind of like keep going until I found something that sort of looked like what I wanted. But we can see there's like 150 results for the word index on this page. So that might take me a little while. What I can see is there's also a post on Stack Overflow here using merge on a column and index in pandas, which is exactly what we're trying to do. We have 2 data frames here. They're trying to do a merge. They say like, I want to merge these 2 data frames and I want to merge on index and project. And they're getting a name error because index here is not defined. And they're just like generally confused about how to do this. And here they show we could use pandas merge with our 2 data frames. And the left one is where we wanted to use the index, and they use this left index keyword argument and then write on the name of the column they want to use, project. So that's one solution. And then someone suggests another solution using data frame join. So there's, and part of the reason this user guide is so long is because there's a lot of different ways to perform joins in pandas. But yeah, again, like I would start at the error message and start by trying to understand error messages. And if you have been following along with the office hours, a lot of times I will have almost no idea what the student is doing because I'll have like none of their code. They will have just posted an error message and say it's like in reference to this question. And because I know how to read Python error messages, I can usually guess what data structure they're referring to and like the context in which this came up. And again, this is like a matter of practice. Thinking critically about what the error message means and trying to use that information to solve the problem. And eventually, as you practice like interpreting error messages and debugging code based on those error messages, you start noticing patterns among error messages and where you and others tend to make mistakes. And you become very quick at diagnosing problems. So, you know, when people were starting out on the mini projects, they were doing things like they would be trying to use the grader, right? Like for the IN mini project or whatever. And they would, you know, have their like numbers to answer the question or whatever. And they would run the grader cell and it would say name grader is not defined. And initially, like everyone was really confused about what this meant. There were a lot of questions on the message board. But now I think most students in the course understand that name errors arise when a name like grader hasn't been assigned any meaning. So we haven't imported anything with that name. We've never written like, we've never written anything like grader equals or def grader or class grader. You know, these are all things that can give meaning to a name. So that process of like coming to understand and interpret this error message and know it means, oh, I need to go back and find like the code where I give meaning to this name and execute that cell and learning to interpret that. We just want to continue building that skill and extending that to a wider variety of problems, essentially. Okay, those videos all finished uploading, so I can tell this person that they're now available. So the video downloads are now available. I answered a question very similar to this yesterday. Are we going to extend the time before the hub shuts down? Yeah, we are. I'm going to send out an email soon. I don't know how soon that will be, but soon, announcing an extension. So here's a question asking something very similar to what we went over as an example. So here, someone is able to get the maximal value from the items column of their data frame, but is unable to get the entire row containing the BNF name as well. So this is like part of the reason I use this as an example is because I know this is something students struggle with, and it's something we ask about. So pandas get row of data frame with max value in column. So if we reset the index of item %, then what we essentially want to do is group by postal code and get the entire row of each group when that row has the max for in the items column. We know we can get the row of a data frame using lock. And the question is simply becomes, how do we get the index of the row with the maximum value in the items column so we can pass that index to lock and extract the row. To do this, we can use the index max method instead of max, as described in this Stack Overflow question. Then we simply need to combine this with our group by using apply. I leave that part to you. To some degree, this is discussed in, let's see, this is Office Hour 31. By about how much? By about 2 weeks is about how long the extension will be. It's going to be a lot. There won't be any more office hours, but the Jupyter Hub will be left on. And I'll continue responding to questions on the message board, though not as frequently as I do now, because I will have to attend to other classes and other instruction duties. But I'll still check in every now and then. I'd like to create a new column on script based on the fact that some practices have multiple postal codes associated with them. We faced this in PW3 using the following method. Then created a new list called join. Scripts and practices don't have the same length as blah, blah, blah. Problem is, I don't know how to make this procedure using pandas. Oh, it's quite a bit easier in pandas. Sort practices first by practice and then by postcode. List of practices, and if there's more than one postcode, the top one will be alphabetically first. Remove duplicates and practices and only keep the top entries. Expanding slightly on S. Cardozo 30's answer. After sorting the data frame, sort values in pandas is probably useful here. We can remove duplicates using, I think it's called drop duplicates. Here we go. Uh, Joining the data frames can be accomplished using the merge method. Which is described in, let's see. The Pandas lecture on joins. And as well as several office hours and in different questions on this discussion board. So just pointing to kind of some of the correct or useful methods in Pandas for doing those different tasks. What is the deadline for completing the mini projects? Essentially, it's when we shut off the Jupyter Hub. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head. It will probably be 2 weeks from Friday, so the 29th, I guess. I mean, technically, basically, you can keep submitting some solutions to the mini projects until we shut off the Jupyter Hub, right? Because you can't submit to the grader except on the Jupyter Hub. That's the only place where you can actually contact the grader. So as long as the Jupyter Hub is up, then you can keep working on the mini projects. And I believe that'll be until the 29th. Okay, so that's all the time I have for today's office hour. The last office hour will be tomorrow, but yeah, I will be sending out an email announcing an extension to keep working on the mini projects. I'll keep checking in on the message board after the end of the office hours, but not with the same frequency. I'll be checking in a little less often. Okay, so I hope you all found that helpful, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.